Evening. Welcome to Love Scriptures. Welcome to our next installment. Um, I try to be as transparent as possible. And here I go doing this again. I've said before how new I am to technology and these platforms of social media in these different ways. So I'm trying to get things set up to be able to go live on different pages. That's what this delay has been about on tonight. I apologize for the couple of minutes that we are late, but we're trying to get things going in a different way. Still, obviously, of course, being here our primary platform, but we're um, trying to get this show that we're doing to be in a couple of other places too. And so it's a work in progress. We're figuring it out. We're walking through it. We're talking through it. We're loving and learning through it along the way. And I appreciate your patience. And I'm glad you are here. Those of you who are here for Loving the Scriptures on tonight, I am so glad to see you. Couple of things to actually think. I thought about it as we are back in school. I think the last school that I heard who have begun classes was just on yesterday. A friend of mine, educators in California, went back to school on yesterday, and so I think like everybody's back to school now all across the nation. And since that's the case, I have been talking about Love Checkup for as believers and just in general from the Love chapter, verse 13. Been talking that up, and we'll continue to talk that up because I suggested and I urge, and with that, we would do that as a way to actually help to develop and help to ourselves that we are urged to be becoming not just better us, but what is intended for us, who is intended for us to be. But since the school has started back, and since I am an educator, a classroom teacher, since last week, had something altogether in mind, or had a plan for today's show to be talking about self-care or self-love, and in a particular way. And we might get to address that some on tonight. But with school being back in for all of us, and especially those of us who are educators, Monique Griffin Gonzalez joined us. Hi, Monique. So to have you with us. But as educators, for educators, I have want to give with us, and I want to discuss with us tonight a love checkup for educators. And of course, anybody who is an educator or an administrator, works in the school systems at all, understand what it is like, especially in most public school systems, the challenge that it is in terms of what the requires and the interaction with students. But it's not just public schools, schools all the way around. Because if you know what that is like, you understand that you have to be prepared in order to deal in order to do your job as an educator. But not just not just teachers know that, not just educators, parents know. Any parent that has a child that goes to schools, what the challenge is like. You know some of what the challenge like for educators in the building, because many of you know what your children are like. Some of you don't have a clue, don't know at all what your children are like. But those of you who are in touch, then you do know that it's a challenge for educators to actually do their job with educating children. And anybody who's concerned and involved, or anybody else who is looking in, realizes what that is like. And because that's the case, I thought that this time, get back into that, I want to talk about a love check for educators. And this necessarily is the way, just as our love checkup in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, um, just like uh, our love checkup in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, this checkup, um, however, is specific for us to get ourselves in a preparation place so that as educators, we will educate about this, even with love. A couple of times from now, I'm actually going to kind of tie a lot of what I'm presenting here in a way that we can understand how love is essential to whatever we are doing as human beings. All right. I'm going to, and a few times from now, I'm going to actually get to tie that up. So stay connected and stay tuned. I'll be talking about when we come to that, because the optimal and the most essential in terms of outcome for whatever we do, whatever field we work in, whatever relationships we engage in, love is that essential. It is that optimal. And I'm going to show then, I'm going to talk about coming up how we recognize that love is that one thing. And of course, if you've listened about our pillars, our the pillars of love and love in the scriptures, then you will readily be able to see how and where I'm going to go with that to tie it all in with love. But for educators on tonight, there are five concepts, five principles that I have as a love checkup for us as educators. And this again is the idea that in order for us to do our job optimally, in order for us to have an essentially beneficial outcome, then for us to have ourselves, having checked ourselves up, so we check in to our role as educators and then get the best out of that experience for our young people. Two things that I start with as I'm coming to our love checkup for educators. First thing is this: it is the understanding that we have to be prepared. And let me make it personal, individual, and say it. You have to be prepared when you go into the class. There's a degree to which before you go in, if you've gone into the classroom and you're not prepared, that you're already too late, which means that you've got to get yourself ready. You have to get your mind right. You have to make that determination for what the day is going to be like before you enter into the classroom. But for sure, before you see students, before they enter into your classroom, you have to have yourself prepared in order to meet them as they come in, but in order to educate them well. That's the first thing. That preparation, however, number two, requires first that you've got to take another look at you. All right. The issue with students and what that's going to be, that becomes a second part. That's secondary to what the preparation is about. The first part is, in you getting prepared, is that you've got to take a second look at you. What do I mean by that? Most of the times when we go into the classroom, we have the idea, we have the concept of what we want to accomplish in that day. We've got our lesson plan and all of those things laid out. And sometimes it's possible not to realize that just because this is what I decide I want to do in class doesn't mean that it's going to happen. One of the ways, most effective ways to ensure that what I want is looking at myself. It's going to take for me to make the connections in order to accomplish what this goal, what this plan is for us today. Those are the first parts of preparation. One, getting yourself together, get your mind right. Looking at yourself and realizing that I have to be able to connect with them first before I can do anything in terms of educating. All right. And so checking ourselves out, getting our mind right, getting our heart right, getting our spirit right. One of the things that I started doing when we first started having students come back into the classroom after the pandemic, after we'd been virtual, before the students start coming in the classroom, I would go through the room and I would touch each chair that the students would sit in, each table, and would pray over my classroom and their seats, not just the room itself, but in the seats that they would be sitting in, so that as they came in and interaction took place with the students, I have already activated the presence of the Holy Spirit in my classroom, and not just the room itself, in the seats that they would be sitting in. And so whatever was happening with the students, Dr. Valencia Edner is with us. So good to have you with us tonight. But as they would sit in that seat where I have already prayed that the Holy Spirit would guide and that he would interact and intervene and interdict and interrupt, even if necessary, whatever behavior, that they're meeting that seat that had been prayed over, that that would influence how things would go in my classroom. And so that for me also was a part of preparation, is a part of preparation for the classroom daily, because God only knows what happens to them before they come to your classroom, that night before, or even that morning. God only knows what happens to them. And so praying for those seats as well is one of the ways that I get prepared for my students as they come in. I see D. Thompson, Deborah Donald, and Demetria Washington. So good to have you all with us on tonight. So as it comes to the Love Checkup for Educators, 5 principles or 5 directives that I'd like to share. And some of this may be familiar with some of you, but this is what I've adopted for myself as a checkup for us for educators this semester. Demetria Washington, a music educator, wonderful. So great to have you with us. The first thing that I suggest as a checkup for us as educators, and let me say this too. Obviously, yes, ma'am, yes, sir. That being in the classroom makes you an educator. However, I see this Love Checkup for Educators for any person that has interaction with young people. Okay. And so whatever that relationship is, Brother Kier Ward is with us. Good to see you, Brother Kier. Whatever that relationship is with young people, I think this checkup for educators is applicable to that. The first principle I want to give as a Love Checkup for Educators is that patience comes before programs. The first principle of a Love Checkup for Educators is that patience comes before program. One of the reasons that's important to us is we are planners as educators. What we have as long-range goals, we've thought through many of those things already. We have daily goals for our students. And so when we enter into the classroom, we know what we want to happen. We know the lesson. We know all of the different parts to that. We do have an outcome anticipated too. But guess what's true? They don't know what we want from them when they first walk into the classroom. And so patience comes before programs, because between the time that they enter into the classroom and the time we give instruction for what we want, we've got to allow whatever, again, they've come from into our classroom. We've got to allow patience for an adjustment to be made, so that what we want to instruct and what we want as an outcome, we allow patience before that program, so that the students can be prepared to do what we ask for. The second principle for Love Checkup for educators is that grace comes before grades. Now, I've said that I teach in public school, and it's not just public school I teach in. I teach in one of those kinds of schools that most people frown upon. And so when it comes to performance of students, too often there is a situation where there's been a challenge to get students to even do work. There's a challenge for students to actually do their best when they do work. Okay. And then there's a time when, after having not done work for the most of the semester or a significant part of the semester, here comes the end of the semester. And there is this push for them to try to do what, Mr. Williams, you got extra credit. Mr. Williams, can I do da, 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 da? Of course, I don't do any of those things. Extra credit and all of that stuff, that's not even the lane that I'm in. However, what I recognize is that when it comes to grading our students, that there has to be grace in what we do. Sister Kimberly Von Daniels has joined us. So good to see you. Thank you for coming. There has to be a grace with us in what we do when it comes to grading. Now, obviously, they have to toe the line. Obviously, there is a rigor that's involved. And of course, addressing rigor is part of Love Checkup for educators for us. But when it comes to grading, understanding where your students are, and taking into account that you have done your best. And taking into account that you have done your best with your students, then there is grace that has to be extended when it comes to your student grade. This is the Love Checkup. As I'm sounding sorry, because I just have my headphones on. Let's try this, see if this is better. Hopefully this is better. So great before grade. The second thing that third principle for us in our Love Checkup for educators is that relationship comes before relationship comes before rigor. And so in our role as educators, certainly the push all around at all times is that there has to be rigor in our work, that we have to make sure that students are able. Very good. We have to make sure our students are able. They have to read on grade level. They have to have reading comprehension at grade level. They have to write on grade level. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. Yes, yes, yes. Essential. All of those things are essential. But when it comes to the rigor that we require for our students, the Love Checkup for educators says that we have to have relationship with students before we apply rigor to our assignments, because it is in the relationship that we have with them. It is through the relationship. You can ask your students and get them to do anything you want to if you have the right relationship with them. And the Love Checkup for educators says that I've got to make sure, even as I'm designing my lesson plans, even as my curriculum, as I'm putting curriculum together, I've got to make sure that first step in that process, that before I get to the actual rigor of the relationship and making sure that as I'm assigning for them and as I'm working towards them being where they're supposed to be as a student, that my relationship with them is intact first. And I'll say it again. If you have the right relationship with your students, you can get them to do anything you want them to do. Had a situation today. I don't even have time to tell the story, but the student came in from point go, late to class, number one, came in from point go, just as obstinate as could be. I came in with his hood on, and other teachers do what they do with hood. Nobody's supposed to wear them. Other teachers don't say anything, but you're not going to wear it in my classroom. So I had to dress him on taking his hood off. He sits down and just decides he's not going to do anything. So I had the instruction given for the students to do whatever work that they were, the work that was assigned for them to do. He sits there, does absolutely nothing. I'm observing, as it's going on. Let me hurry up and tell this so I can get to these other principles. But what I realized was, I don't know what happened with him coming into class. There was some kind of chip on the shoulder or whatever. But what I realized is he needed a personal touch today. And so I asked him to get his things and to come over to my desk. I had a chair sitting by. He came over to the desk. And I walked him through the first couple of parts of the lesson, and it clicked on him, and he took right in to do the rest of the work, and with a certain eager, not just overwhelmingly happy about it, but a quite different eagerness than before when he came into the classroom. But it was because I established a different relationship with him by bringing him to my desk. And so for what I asked him to do, the relationship is what fostered his ability to turn on to what I was asking for him as a teacher. Let me get to these last two things. This love checkup for educators. I'm gonna do them really fast because my time is really short. The fourth principle for love checkup for educators is, okay, I see that. I'll actually get to go to 634. The fourth principle in love checkup for educators is that dignity goes before discipline. Now, the setting that I'm in, I've already told you, it's one of those kinds of schools where it's looked down upon all across the city. And so there are problems with discipline. And anybody who's an educator in a classroom today knows that discipline is one of the most predominant issues that instructors, that educators have to deal with. All right. Just talked about one of my students, but it's a common situation that we are faced with on a daily and, dare I even say, an hourly basis, because you can first hour through eighth hour, you can have issues with students all day long that requires that some type of discipline takes place. And of course, now when I was in school, up to high school, even in Detroit, Michigan, we got paddled for discipline issues. Okay. You'll go to jail and they'll put you under it if you physically discipline children today. You can't even touch them at all. However, you have to be wise enough to understand that there is a time and a place in the classroom, especially even where discipline has to be measured out. You have to determine how that is. And of course, there are different ways you can redirect students' behavior. You can call them to the side, have a conversation with them. You can call home, call a parent, whatever type of discipline. And even if it's one of those cases where you have to dismiss a student from your class and send them to detention or to whatever you have in that regard, whatever form of discipline it is, you've got to remember your students' dignity. Dignity before discipline. I'll tell this very quickly. And again, let me say to you, sisters and brothers, this applies to all relationships that are around us. Several years ago, I went to the National Baptist Congress of Christian Education. Don't even remember what city it was this time. And I was in the youth division. I was working with one of the state officers here and was there with him in the youth division. And there was a preacher for the week for the youth division, and pretty good preacher. His father was actually a preacher I admired and learned so much from. And of course, because of his father's relationship with the Congress, he got the job that he got as the preacher for the youth division. He's arrogant. I have to say it. There's no other way. Very, 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 very arrogant. Because he's made it on what his father has. Father has a national reputation. Anyhow, there was some disagreement that the speaker had with one of the leaders of the youth division. And in his message the next day, a scathing denunciation of her came in his message. He rebuked her sorely. And now, only if you know what had happened before would you understand what he was saying, because he couched this denunciation of her in his message that he was preaching. It was terrible. He's a young fella. And so I was prompted that after he finished his message that I needed to say something to him. And so as he came out of the auditorium, I went up to him and walked down the hall with him. And I said to him, I said, man, that message was a good work, good work is what I said. You did good work in that, I said. And you really got her told. I said, I could tell, by what you were saying, who you were talking about. And I wasn't even close to the situation, but I had some sense of what was going on. This is the words I said to him, because he was excited about me complimenting him. He says, then I said to him, after I told him about the matter, I said to him that there's a time I know that you have to get people straight. You got to check people sometimes. But this is what I said. Always leave people with their dignity. And when I said that to him, he went from this glowing appreciation for me telling him how good his message was. He turned to me with a look of consternation. And I can tell what I said went straight to his heart, because in all that he did, he was irrespective of that other leader's dignity. And what I'm saying to us, when it comes to our students, when it comes to disciplining our students, we have to put dignity before discipline. And then the last principle of Love Checkup for educators is simply this: love comes before lessons. So whatever it is you want to teach, whatever it is, the desire for them to learn, the best way to get them to do it, and it takes you a while to get to understand that, but love comes before lessons. And when they know you love them, just like the relationship, you can get them to do whatever you want them to do. That's going to be our time. We've got to unpack, Brother Kier, very quickly. I know I came in late, so the next time we talk, we're going to unpack this more. I had a rough semester last year to the point where I'm contemplating not teaching this year. Whoa, very interesting. Lawana Townsend Anderson, Jess have joined us at the end of this. And from Brother Kier's comment, looks like I probably need to bring this back for us next week. And so on next week, we will continue with this discussion of the Love Checkup for educators. Thank you, Sister Demetria Washington. Next week, be prepared to talk about love as teachers to return. Yes, teachers, please, ma'am, please, sir, come back on next week. We will get to go through this love checkup for teachers and educators. And I want to hear from you about your first love and some of the things that you can suggest and help educators with in terms of being successful in the classroom through the way of love. Thank you so much for coming, everybody. Next week, 6:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 5:00 Central. Blessings on you. Good night.